Mayor, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you, Max. Good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, February 22nd, 2022. This is a virtual special meeting of the Commissioners of the City of Rehoboth Beach. I'd like to call this meeting to order at exactly 9:00 a.m. Thank you all for being here. With that, I'd like to do the roll call. Commissioner Susan Gay.
Here.
Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Jay Legree.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills is here. I don't see Ed, are you on the line? Not yet. We do have the mayor and 5 other commissioners. At 6, we have a quorum and we're formally able to conduct business. Thank you for being here. With that, I'd like to thank all those that are watching virtually. I'd also like to thank those that have pre-registered to speak, and that is one couple, Mary Alice and David St. Clair of Stokely Street, the 200 block of Stokely Street. Thank you for being on. As appropriate, I will call on you at the appropriate times and seek your input and feedback on this topic today. So thank you for being here. With that, I'd like to remind everybody, of course, that any documents that we have that have been created that support our agenda topics that are available prior to the meeting are embedded in the agenda. Go to the city website, cityofrehoboth.com. On the right side center of the homepage, click on the legislative portal, and you'll bring you up to the document center, and you'll be able to seek the agenda and support documents. With that, as far as correspondence goes, there's no new correspondence. There is correspondence in past meeting from Carolyn and Dave Diefendorfer that was not able to be embedded in the last agenda, I don't believe, but we received separately. With that, I want to remind everybody the purpose of this special meeting is to essentially discuss in entirety the Chapter 253 trees, including reformatting and creating new articles of the article. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Susan Gay. Commissioner Gay, would you first start off by just doing a very brief introduction of your 2 support documents that are embedded in the agenda, and then I have a comment to make after that.
Well, and I actually have a little bit longer introduction than that, in that I want to sort of remind people where we are today with those articles. So you want me to do the whole thing and then you'll jump in?
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Okay. First of all, just as a reminder, especially to anyone watching, this is the 3rd meeting we've had to discuss the tree ordinance. At the first 2, we concentrated on what was then Article 1, which was trees on public property. We did not get into regulations for private homeowners at all because it is 2 separate, completely separate parts of the code. So having reached a pretty good point on that, we now move on to the part of the code that does deal with private tree regulations, and as such will probably take several hours to get through. But you may remember that in the very first meeting that I gave some, we had met last winter, a year ago, to talk about the objectives and the goals of the tree ordinance. And so at the first meeting, I presented some of those objectives as they relate directly to the aspects of the ordinance that we're talking about then. And so today I'd like to do the same thing with the parts of the ordinance that we're going to be talking about today. Just a couple of very quick reminders. First of all, the overall goal of rewriting the tree ordinance is to enact a user-friendly, easily understood, and effective tree ordinance. And that it may sound simple, but it is far from it. It has taken a decade, as we've discussed before, of various groups, including the Planning Commission, the Law Oversight Committee, the Green Infrastructure Committee, and much citizen inputs to get where we are today. And we still have some things to work out. So the objectives that we established last year that directly relate to what we'll be talking about today. I'm not going to, read all of them word for word, but essentially we're looking at establishing a right tree, right place policy. We're looking at the best ways to preserve, protect, and conserve our abundant tree canopy. We're looking at ways to address tree retention as well as tree replacement, as well as preservation of both individual trees and the urban forest, and to maintain and increase the city's tree canopy on both private and public land. And there's two more: to encourage plantings through through incentives and sensible regulations, and to eliminate inconsistencies in the current code. That was one of the problems with it, and to make it clear, concise, and user-friendly. So I just want to say a couple of caveats before we start today, and that is that throughout this process, throughout the last year since Mayor Mills asked me to coordinate all of this, is I've served as basically a compiler of all the work that's gone into creating the changes in the tree ordinance over the last decade. As such, I'm not the author of it. In fact, there's still some things I have questions about. So today I'll be putting on my commissioner's hat to evaluate it along with all of the rest of you, and I'll serve as a scribe for what we all jointly agree, and I hope we come to consensus on a number of issues. Another thing going into it, Liz Lingo is with us today, and we've had an opportunity in recent weeks to put the draft ordinance to the test, meaning that she compared permits that she has received over the last few years and compared it to the current ordinance, and how that same permit request would be evaluated in the new ordinance. And that has actually brought up some issues. So it's good that we were able to road test it before putting it in place, because though it's brought up some issues that we will need to work through. And then I'm going to share one more slide, and that is, you may remember that, come on, where's it going? You may remember that at the first meeting, I gave this data about, what kind of, how many trees were being removed and how many were being replaced on both private and city property. And it was very obvious that we were losing trees on private property, and we were, and the city tree replacement was much greater. So you may be wondering why I show this again. Well, you remember that one of the objectives was to increase, where are we here? Go back. To maintain and increase, where geographically appropriate, the city's tree canopy. So I bring that up because, spoiler alert, we're going to have fewer on private property as a result of both of building in the city as well as changes in this ordinance. So I just throw that out there from the beginning. And then in terms of the organization of it, again, the current ordinance is simply 2 articles. Article 1 is on city trees. Article 2 is on trees on regulations on private property. But through the course of working through the first article, several things came up to suggest that a reorganization is in order. One is that the city solicitor suggested taking all of the appeals section out and putting that in an article to follow the others. It's to sit by itself rather than cluttering up the rest of the ordinance. So we will be doing that. And then as I was going through it, I saw that the definitions were sort of stuck in the middle. They were at the beginning of Article 2, and normally, in most parts of the code, you have a general purpose section that has things in it like definitions and applicability and any kind of findings or purpose. So sure enough, this ordinance did have those elements, and I have pulled them out, and they will ultimately be a brand new Article 1 with just those 4 elements: findings, purpose, applicability, and definitions. And then Article 2 will be the former 1 that we talked about before, and Article 3 will be the private regulations. So it is my great hope today that we can get through these background general purpose sections of the code fairly quickly, and then get into the meat of it, which is the regulations of trees on private property.
Thank you, Susan. Great introduction. I'd like to sneak in there a note of some of the city staff that helps make this meeting happen. I forgot to do that. Max Hamby and Brant McCormick of the IT department, Ann Womack, city secretary, and then of course city participants from staff, Liz Lingo, our arborist, city manager Sharon Lynn. Again, thank you all for being here. With that, Susan, I'd like to try to take a stab at an explanation. You can help correct me if need be. I want to remind everybody that the documents that we are working from today are include red line versions highlighting changes, deletions, comments, additions from previous editions or previous versions. You might recall hearing from the Law Oversight Commission or Committee and from us earlier, Susan earlier, that the red line versions are not highlighting changes to the existing code. It got to be too complicated, they're too complex. And so again, the support documents that we have that we're working from are red line versions from the hybrid version compiled by Susan that she mentioned at the beginning. Susan, do you want to say anything else?
Nope.
All righty, well, we're going to turn it over to you and let's get rolling.
Okay. Well, I'm working from the document dated February 17th. That's version 2 draft tree ordinance. And as I said in my introduction, the first few sections are very general. They're not the regulations. They're just the findings, the purpose, the applicability, and definitions. And I think the definitions, there's some questions and things we need to change definitely on that. But the only things I would say right off the bat about the findings and the purpose, and I'll address those jointly. First of all, not every chapter in our code has those. Many do, but the current tree ordinance has findings and purpose, and these are very similar. Most of the points in here are exactly the same as what's in the current ordinance, and exactly the same as what the Planning Commission's rewrite included, with 2 additions. Under findings, number F, where it says trees are a vital component of the city's green infrastructure that shape a healthy, resilient, and sustainable community by supporting vital ecosystem services such as air purification, temperature mitigation, and stormwater inception.
Let's give, Susan, let's reference line number also.
Okay, the line 35, right?
36 to 38 is what I have.
Okay.
But it's section F. Okay.
Yeah, section F. That's funny if our numbers are off. Anyway, yeah, they're just off by 1. Yeah, 253.1 at the top at findings, number F. That's the one I just read. That came about as a result that several years ago, 3 years ago, actually, Commissioner Sharp, in her former role as chair of the Mayor's Advisory Committee on Trees, did a major presentation to the commissioners where it was agreed afterwards that green infrastructure would be a goal for the city. So that piece has been added as a result of that. And in the purpose section, the last one on mine, it's line 64, 65, promoting the education of citizens on proper tree care practices and the importance of increasing our urban forest. And that's been added just because with an emphasis on native species and on caring for trees by planting the right size or by being able to take out a tree in order to protect a larger, healthy tree. We hope all of that will serve as an education about what's needed for the tree canopy in the city. Otherwise, it's exactly the same as what exists now. So are there any questions about those 2 sections? Okay, hearing none, I'll...
wait a minute, Commissioner Legree, go ahead.
Susan, say again where this, the last clause that you described on education is located?
It's on page 2, lines. It's on mine. It's line 64, 65.
Commissioner Legree, on mine, it's 57. I just printed out mine last night, so I don't know what the discrepancy is.
Yeah, I don't either. I printed mine out a few days ago, but I don't, yeah, anyway, okay.
The online version is consistent with the mayor's numbering.
Okay.
I'm looking at the online version.
Okay, let me, I should get mine up.
So Glenn, you said my numbering reflects what's online?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
All righty.
Yes, it's not off by much. It must have been when I did the 2 in front at the top of it. Let me get it also up on screen. Okay. 57. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
All right. Go ahead. Move on.
So then the next one, starting on line 60, then 253, the applicability clause again comes straight out of the current code, I think, and and the Planning Commission's edition, everybody's version, the chapter, what it applies to. I guess my only question about this, and I basically just lifted it out of what had previously been written. And I guess I just wonder why C is not, whether C should be B3 on line 68, because it says activities that require the review and approval by the city arborist are private maintenance of or planting of trees on public land, all activities that require an approved tree plan, and all activities that require a tree removal permit. So I don't know why that has been broken out as a separate clause, but it was that way previously. So I would just assume move that to B3.
I think that's right. I mean, I've seen that previously, and I wondered the same thing over the past several years. I think probably a B3 is the right place to put it.
Okay. So that's my only comment on that one. Any questions? Nothing?
Nope.
Okay. Now we get into the definitions, and actually there are a few things in here that I know we want to talk about. I think the mayor's mentioned to me that he had concerns about, but at the same time, I think oftentimes it's better to, the issue with definition may come up once we get into the section where that appears. And so we may be doing some back and forth there, or it may be appropriate to, skip over some of these. And then when they come up in the ordinance, we'll go back to them. But right off the bat, I will mention the ones with breast height and line 77, and there's also DBH, which is diameter at breast height, line 94. These are measurements of the size of trees, and I just noticed actually this morning that caliper is not in there, and I don't think it's in the current code either. But I do intend to add it, and I think Liz may have sent me recently a definition. There's a difference there. The diameter at breast height is the measurement that's used on a mature tree, she explained to me, and the caliper is the measurement when you buy one at the nursery to plant. And we're changing the size of the caliper required, I think, for at least that's what's in the ordinance, from 3 inches to 2 inches. But that's caliper, whereas a diameter at breast height is the number you would see for a larger protected tree, so like an 8-inch or a 24-inch. So clearly caliper needs to be added and is not there currently.
Commissioner Gay, can I ask you a question? This meeting and the last meeting, you mentioned the same thing about the applicability of DBH versus caliper. I don't know if it might be prudent to include that in the definition so that the layperson understands when each is being used.
Sure, yeah, that would be fine. Okay. And then let me see if I see what happened is there's a page break. Okay. I'm going down. I think let me just point out a couple of things. If anybody, please raise your hand if you have questions about individual ones. On line 113, land disturbance activity has been added. I believe that that I added that at some point in discussions with. You'll see this when it comes up in the ordinance. But the requirements of when you have to have a tree plan used to be based on either the square footage of a building plan or the cost of a building permit. And those don't always have to do with trees. So it's been changed. Liz had suggested we change that to any land disturbance activity would require a tree plan. So therefore we had to define land disturbance activity.
Susan, I don't, to go through, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
And if you're ready for a question.
Absolutely.
Just curious, and Liz may be able to help understand this under damage. In keeping in mind, trying to make this clear and understandable for the average citizen, is this severe decline, disfigurement, discoloration, defoliation, removal of death of any tree which is intentionally caused or result? Is that kind of standard language coming from ANSI, or is that easily understandable?
Is Liz there to answer? I mean, this is in the, it's in the planning. Let me see if it's actually in the current code.
Okay.
Let me see if it's in there exactly the same way.
It may well be. I just,
Yeah, it is. It's in the current code. So I don't know where it came from, but it was probably written, well, it was written when the code was passed in the 90s, I guess.
it's fine. I just question if that's kind of standard language that comes from somewhere that if Liz is available to answer, is that easily determined, that quote damage? Is that sufficient or too extravagant?
Commissioner, I'm here. I've
Okay.
never, it doesn't ring any bells with me in terms of like relating back to ISA or ANSI standards. I mean, the only thing that looks funny in there to me is discoloration. I'm not sure what that would have to do with a tree, how you could discolor a tree, but maybe there's some other definition of it I'm not aware of.
I mean, it's fine with me. I just, for application for you to interpret and, apply it, is this good language?
Let me see how it's used. Okay, so removal. Sorry, I just plugged damage in to search for it in the document. A tree that's trimmed. Basically, it says in here that nobody can damage a protected tree. So that's how they're saying damage. Severe decline. Okay, yeah, I mean, it seems to make sense just in a quick perusal of the rest of the ordinance that you would define damage, whether it's intentional or just, we'll say like, I guess negligence would assume it was accidental. Oh, I didn't know that I couldn't top my tree.
Gotcha.
So, okay. I mean, it makes sense to me.
Okay, that's fine. Great.
Can we take out the word discoloration, Liz?
Yeah, unless anybody has an idea of what that, I mean, I don't
Where it came from?
feel like it would have had to refer to something, but maybe it was just one of those things. I would recommend though that we make, I don't see why DDH and breast height need to be two separate definitions.
Okay, I wondered about that.
Yeah, I would say just combine them into
Okay, I'll do that.
And then also under the definition for development, in seeing terms used in the other parts of the code, do we need to refer here in development to a minor or major subdivision or a merger or a site plan review? Does this development, and I guess Glenn, I turn to you for that, is this covering all aspects of that development defined?
So we've got,
I don't know how it's used in the.
Well, just other places it's referenced that they also include merger or site plan review.
Right, exactly. And this one is left over. This is also in the current code, so it was written, before there was a site plan review process.
Right.
I mean, I think it covers it, but I'm trying to think what else would be put through building and licensing that doesn't fit here. The act, the process, state erection, demolition of structures, or adding to existing structures or subdivision of a lot.
The phrase is used elsewhere, and again, it may not be applicable, but they talk about subdivisions, major, minor subdivisions, then merger, and then site plan review. So they may not be applicable to development, but if they're used elsewhere, so I just didn't know if that should be included here.
Glenn, can you add that to your homework list for next time?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I see Tim Bennett's hand. Yeah.
Go ahead, Tim. Well, we got Tim and then Jay. Go ahead.
Under damage, and it may be somewhere else, so I apologize if it is, but what do we do in the case, or how do we describe damage that's done by, for instance, this year with snow, I saw a lot of trees that were damaged, or we have a tornado or hurricane that comes through. Should there be something under that damage definition, or is that elsewhere? There
is something elsewhere about, natural occurrences and being able to, you know, take down a tree without a permit or immediately or something. I believe those kind of natural disasters are addressed elsewhere. They're not addressed obviously in the definition, but they are addressed in the code. They may need to be better addressed. I don't know. We'll see when we get to it.
Thank you. Commissioner LeGree?
I'm just trying to figure out, when I see land disturbance of soil, or I'm just wondering if I'm a homeowner and I'm reading that, I'm going to tell myself, once you dig a hole for the ball that you're going to plant a little tree, you have disturbed the soil. And if you do that, you have to have a tree plan. And I am searching if we've said what happens to require a homeowner to
We'll get to that.
to do a tree plan.
So
And-
it's really the extent of land disturbance activity then, isn't it?
Well, and you'll see when we get to that section.
Do we know more about that?
Yes, and I mean, you raise a good point that just the planting of one tree is in itself land disturbance. But I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but I will tell you the way it came up was there were two metrics, I guess, that were used previously. One was, and I think this may be in the current code, that a building plan of more than 500 square feet would trigger a plan. And then in the Planning Commission revision, it was building in excess of 20,000, a project in excess of $20,000 would trigger a tree plan. And as Liz and our tree committee talked about it, she was saying, first of all, that the 20,000 didn't make any sense because somebody could be renovating a kitchen. That has nothing to do with the tree outside. But at the same time, somebody could be building a deck that was less than 500 square feet where a tree might need to be protected or involved. So that's why it came up with basically, any land disturbance activity, so that you're exempting then the internal renovations. They don't have to have a tree plan, but that any external work on the house or the property would. I think that's how it came up. Liz, is that your understanding?
I'm trying to remember because we worked on this so long ago. It might have even been before we had the sediment and erosion ordinance, and I don't know if that changes anything now because they set that threshold at 1,000 square feet disturbed.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, right. So the silt
Yeah.
fence is required through the building and licensing if you disturb 1,000 square feet or more.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, right now we can require silt fence and protection for any application that comes in as we deem it necessary, right? So they might only be doing a 200 square foot deck, but it might be by a tree. So we ask them to protect that tree or the trees along the path of construction. But if it's less than 500, it never triggers the planting, right? So that's the difference. We can require protection, but we can't make them meet the minimum density just because they're putting in a 300 square foot deck. So I'm not sure if that changes how we're using land disturbance activity in this draft code or not.
Yeah, I think it was added. I think the definition was added because the phrase is in one particular section, and I think we should just get to that section and see, what.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Gay, I was going to say, any of these definitions you think are best deferred until we get to that discussion, that might save us a little time.
Yeah.
Commissioner Gossett?
Yeah, just a couple of questions that I made on invasive species. We talk about that, and again, just trying to from a user standpoint, it says an alien species, who, et cetera.
Right.
Is there a list of that, or who is that defined by? Or if I'm trying to figure out what an invasive species is, where do I go to determine that?
There's a few different resources. Delaware has an invasive species council. I want to say there's some sort of federal website that lists everything across the entire country.
Gotcha.
I'm not sure. Once again, I'm not sure how we use it here. Invasive.
I had wondered if because it's also referred to in the code about invasive species, and we do list a few, and I think I think you had wanted to retain, somebody had said we wanted to retain a list of some of the more common ones in the code. But in addition to that, I thought we ought to refer, just as we refer to the Delaware tree list somewhere else, we should maybe refer to the Delaware invasive species list as well.
That's it. Yeah, we have the, what does it say in here? It says the Delaware Forest Service.
And they maintain an invasive list?
Yeah, there's an invasive species council. I want to say it's I'm trying to think, because they do like small grants and stuff, and I think it's through the Department of Ag. I'd have to look it up though, how much work they do with invasive plants. Let me see.
Perhaps you could just look at that for,
we can
addition in the future.
Okay, yeah, I see it. It does. It's DelawareInvasives.net, and it does. They have a disc list. Species that are non-native have the potential for widespread dispersal and establishment. And the species were all chosen by a committee of experts. And there is quite a few of them.
So again, something to just in the code to reference back to that, the Delaware Forest Service or what have you. So people know where to look. And that way we don't, as a city, don't have to maintain it and update it.
Yeah, I think, if we appropriately reference it, a quick Google search will pull. Yeah. That's the first thing that came up on mine. So
okay, we'll add some sort of.
And the next question I had, and really is Liz for interpretation under line tree. It says any tree that at breast height sits astride a property line. When I hear the word astride, I think I'm riding a horse. So is that an adequate word to do that? I was thinking like straddling or something of that nature, but has that been a problem in interpreting it with people?
Is that even the word that we use now? I'm not sure.
It is. I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah,
I wouldn't be against a different word. And really, Glenn might know better than I on this, but there's been court cases that haven't even lined up. Like generally it's accepted that if any portion of the tree at 4.5 feet, like 1 inch of a 30-inch tree is on another property, it is a shared tree. But courts have ruled differently. Like if it was planted by one person and 1 inch out of 30 is on the other person's, then sometimes they do rule that it's the primary owner. I don't think there's been a lot of consistency in it over the years. I haven't had too many problems with it. It seems like if people want to remove a line tree, usually their neighbors or the co-owner is in agreement. I can only think of like 1 or 2 times in 6 years where they didn't agree.
But if you're establishing tree density on a lot, though, does a line tree count towards that?
That's one of the controversies we have to work out.
Okay.
No, it doesn't.
Well, that's a future discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, in the current code, line tree is defined as any tree located on a property line. So this revised wording comes from the Planning Commission's revision. Is it easier just to stick with the current one, or?
I would say stick with the definition we have.
Okay.
It's not been a problem. And now that Commissioner Gossett said that, every time I read this, it's what I'm going to think.
Sorry about that.
So any tree located on a property line. Okay. The other thing I'll point out that was added new is a native tree. We actually talked about this when we talked about Article 1, that it's a tree species known to grow naturally, not just in Delaware. We don't want to limit it too much, but in the mid-Atlantic coastal region. And I don't know if we're ready to go to the next page with them on things like park trees, which I talked to the mayor about, and I really think we need to do some revision there. That was actually just picked up from the current code and from the Planning Commission's edition, but we have since this was written, we now have a definition in the code for a city park. So one of the things, and this is the definition here is a little oddball.
Susan, if you don't mind, let me share my chuckle on this.
Yeah.
Park trees in public parks having individual names. I tell you, it gave me a chuckle because I interpreted it that as I'm going to walk in the park and there's going to be a tree named Stanley and a tree named Glenn and a tree named Susan. And of course, I understand what it is. Trees in public parks having individual names. I think it was Commissioner Gossett to help create Parks and Recreation chapter. The individual names that were defined in there. So, but I'm not particularly happy with the definition. I think it could almost be condensed to trees in public parks, because afterwards you keep reading on, it says trees in public parks and all areas owned by the city. Well, that's everything.
Right.
That's not confining it to parks. And also for me, all areas owned by the city, that means a street tree is a park tree. And I think there should be a differentiation there. So I told Susan I would prefer that the definition for park trees was probably more condensed.
Well, how about this? I was working on this yesterday. What about if it's just trees in public parks as defined in 195-1, which is the Parks and Recreation chapter that includes a definition of our public parks?
I may be missing something, but I don't see where park trees is used in this code besides the definition. Like when I put it in my search box, nothing shows up. So
I think isn't there something in the first article on city? It may actually be city trees there. In fact, as the mayor was talking, it occurred to me, because he talked about city property and how, this implies more than just parks. We don't have a definition in here for city tree. We have park tree, we have street tree, and that's always been there. That's one of those things that's been in the first part of the code since 1988. But we don't have city tree.
Yeah, which we do need a definite, like if we want to establish ownership over all trees in the right of way, that would be encompassed in city tree, I believe, as well as street tree. But I don't think we need park trees if we don't reference it in a single place.
But we need city tree.
We do need
city tree. And maybe city tree can reference trees located in parks as a city tree. Or like the mayor said, trees located on land owned by the city.
All right. So we should maybe replace park tree with city tree and encompass what's in parks within the city tree definition.
That's what makes the most sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, because that would include all the trees located on city hall property.
Right.
Weird little like Bayard and Scarborough, which aren't parks but do have trees.
Yep. Okay. We can do that. I will clean it up some. Again, this is the park tree and street tree have been in there for a long time. So I think this is better. I didn't realize it wasn't used though, Article 1.
Thank you.
And I do have an explanation under the protected tree, starting in, is that line 141?
Yes.
I don't know why on number 2, so line 144, that 4 was supposed to be marked out. I don't know why it wasn't. The 8 was inserted, meaning that, and this is one where the existing code calls a protected tree one that is 6 inches or more in dBH. The Planning Commission's version took it down to 4. The Law Oversight version took it up to 8. So I left it at 8 for protected tree. And I don't know, Liz, if you want to weigh in on that.
I'm fine with 8. The way the code is now, it's like 37 different, like if it's in the front yard, it's 4 inches and it's protected. If it's in the backyard, it's 6. If it's a holly or a cedar or a dogwood, it's 4 inches. So
right.
The simpler, the better, which pretty much means that if somebody's planting it for minimum density or for your tree planting requirements, it could be as small as 2 inches and be protected. So that's covered in number 1. Otherwise, how big of a size of a tree do we want to protect? 8 inches seems reasonable to me.
Okay.
It gives people a little bit more time to kind of what I call like change their mind, or if saplings start to grow and all of a sudden they're 3, 4, 5 inches in diameter, they don't have to get a tree permit to remove them, which that does happen.
Okay. All right. Okay, and then I'm wondering if we also have a problem with the street trees definition. Now, the reason that's in there is red line is because it's been moved over. It used to be in the first article that we already talked about, and I think we did talk about this one then, but this is we left this definition alone. Do we need to change it?
Well, I just put that in the search box too, and nothing came up. So I feel like,
but the first article does address in some detail what to do about street trees. It's weird that it doesn't.
Let me see. Well, I'm looking at the version that was posted on the website. Let me see. I guess my point is maybe street and park trees are just completely encompassed by city tree.
Except there are very specific rules about street trees, it seems like, and what people can do with them and what all that. So I don't know.
We only have Article 2 loaded into, is that right?
Yeah, no, this was in a previous article. Yeah, this is not in, the street trees won't be in today's.
Yeah, because we did talk about street trees pretty in depth in terms of like pruning requirements over roads and sidewalks.
Definitely.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I do believe we need to have a definition of street trees. I believe Article 1 does have it in there because we talked about it last time. My things are specificity with street trees in the definition. It says basically trees that are between property lines. That means on my side of the street, from my property line to the other side of the street to their property line, any tree in between. So that would include, to me, that would include trees in the median, say of King Charles, because that's between property lines. So that would be inclusive of a street tree. But I do have a question. Let's take an example in Country Club Estates where you've got private property on each side of the street. You've got perhaps the property line coincides with the inner side of the concrete sidewalk on both sides. Okay, so that would put street trees between property lines, specifically locating them between the concrete sidewalk and the curb line. Now, there's situations in various places in town, such as second block of Maryland Avenue, where on one side of the street, the property line coincides with the inner side of the concrete sidewalk. But the other side, the property line is at least 3 feet inside the sidewalk. So is it a street tree only if it's between the sidewalk and the curb line? Because that's normally what I envision of as a street tree. Or can a street tree be on the opposite side of the sidewalk because it's fulfills this definition as it's between the property lines?
I know. Yeah, I know what you mean. Generally, it's accepted that any tree located on the right of way is considered a street tree. In other municipalities, at least. Doesn't mean that's what we have to do.
Well, I just want to make sure there's clarity there, because as we go through this and continue to look at applicability of street trees, I just want us to be mindful that it could include trees in the median and trees possibly on both sides of the sidewalks.
Maybe we should mention right of way in there.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Glenn, are you following my conversation?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I think Liz is right that we typically treat street trees as anything in the right of way. So if there's a better way to say it, maybe we should, but I agree, even if it's on the inside of the sidewalk, not between the sidewalk and the paved surface of the street, it still would be considered a street tree as long as it's in the right of way.
I'd say the one thing now that I'm thinking of that is somewhere like Columbia Avenue or Henlopen, where our right of way is, we have the 2-lane road and then 30 feet on either side. Is a tree that's 25 feet from the road still considered a street tree?
Because it's in the right of way, right?
Yeah, because it's going to be located in the right of way, but it probably won't even be overhanging the street or anywhere near it at that point.
Well, again, I think that's where, as we go through the rest of this and we come across street trees, we need to be mindful of that scenario, my scenario, and others.
Yeah.
Right.
Is-
Okay. I
again-
think the definition will change, or probably needs to be changed to cover right away. But I don't know that we're going to come to it today, because today we're on the private property part of the ordinance.
Yeah,
So-
no, that's fine. Commissioner Gossett?
Yeah, just if we use right away, I think that would solve other problems. But if we do continue with this, we have streets, avenues, or ways. But we also in the city have lanes, roads, and place. So I know it's technical, but we don't list everything that we have named in the city as to types of streets. So right away may cover all of it.
Yeah, okay. We'll work on that. Okay, anything else? Going on down, a few things have been added, and I noticed a mistake in line 178 where it says tree preservation plan. That's actually in the ordinance, it says tree protection plan. I don't know, the preservation, I guess, was picked up from the one above. So there's a whole section that the Law Oversight Committee added on tree protection, and these are used there. So that's why they've come into the definitions. So it may be better to talk about those when we talk about that section, but I just want to make the correction that the title of the second one is tree protection plan, not preservation plan.
But Commissioner Gay, you're saying that line 174 is correct? Tree
Yes,
preservation?
I believe so. Yeah,
Hearing.
yeah, that one is correct, and it's tree protection plan
Okay.
for 190.
Question for Liz or other on defining a tree, just a simple tree, we say a living woody plant. Would that be a place to talk about preferred trees or list of plantable trees, or we're just talking of a tree?
I think they pulled that definition directly from what we have now, which I actually do use when people want to try and argue that an 8-foot tall crepe myrtle is a tree. We use this. It has to be capable to attain a height of 15 feet.
Yeah, I've got written down here crepe myrtle.
Well, they're harder because I have a crepe myrtle in my yard that's about 30 to 35 feet tall and has a 25-foot wide canopy. So I consider it a tree, but a lot of these smaller ones are not. And there's other plants that are that way. Like if you look up a definition of, say, witch hazel, it'll say a shrub or a small tree. Right. But I don't know if it's a spot to actually put a list of different species. I think we're just trying to define it for the ordinance.
But the 15-foot is what you use as criteria then?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
If a crepe myrtle is 15 feet, you would count it.
Yes.
Okay.
So the only thing that gets really difficult for me is, okay, yes, you put in there's a crepe myrtle there that's 15 feet tall, and I come back a year later and it's been chopped.
Right.
Whether it's appropriately pruned like a pollarding or just randomly chopped down like a shrub, that's where we get into a problem. It makes it hard to deal with crepe myrtles. Like there's a few different species that grow to like the height of the one I have in my yard. But there's a lot that grow in that 15 to like 25-foot range.
I think I might use the term butchered instead of chopped.
I think there's a reference to that in the code somewhere about overly trimming.
Yeah, I've seen drafts where and this would be helpful, any tree ornamentally trimmed.
Yeah, that's in there somewhere, I think.
Doesn't get counted.
Right.
Because if somebody's like hedging a holly, or, I mean, I've seen it done with, you can do that with different types of trees, then you may let a holly grow to 16 feet and then hedge it into a little triangle. Is that still a tree? I don't know. It still has many benefits of trees, but it doesn't have the canopy.
Right.
So,
Okay, I think that is in there.
Yeah.
Something about being trimmed ornamental.
Should that term in tree definition say having a canopy? Because it says a less well-defined crown.
we could, crown and canopy, I think, are used somewhat interchangeably there. To me, they're the same thing.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the crown of the tree is the canopy.
Mm-hmm.
So when it says that well-defined crown, what they're looking for is not that multi-stem, like the witch hazel that could kind of be a small bushy tree. That makes that not really a tree. Now, if the witch hazel, somebody trained it and pruned it to a single stem and then it kind of goes up and out like a Japanese maple, we could, I mean, I came across one the other day and I wasn't sure because it was like 25 feet tall. So for all intents and purposes, it was a tree.
So would you suggest changing the word crown to canopy?
If it makes it more consistent throughout the ordinance, if we use the word canopy and not crown, I think that would make sense.
Well, we certainly talk about canopy in terms of requiring the one tree to be high canopy, but at the same time, aren't there trees that are a lot of trees are allowed that aren't canopy trees? There are.
Yeah. Well,
so there's still trees.
It depends on your definition of, like, canopy they talk about as like a spread. Right. So you can have a red bud that's 20 feet tall and has a 20-foot wide canopy, right? Mm-hmm. So that still has a canopy. It's not a high canopy tree like we talk about in the code, right? But it still has, even though it's an understory tree, it still has a wide crown, a wide canopy.
What about, aren't there like columnar kind of species that we allow, you know, that are
they're no man's land. The columnar ones, basically, I'd say almost every tree has some sort of cultivar that people develop to be columnar. Okay. And they can be really beautiful.
Yeah.
But they don't have a wide canopy, a shade canopy. So they're you call them little play on words. It's a nativar. So it's a cultivar of a native tree. Mm-hmm. So a pin oak, for example, has a columnar cultivar. Okay. Where it technically still is a pin oak. A sweet gum, white pine, they all, tulip poplar, they all have columnar cultivars.
But we would count those as trees, wouldn't we?
Right now I am, but with, and it's very difficult, but with some discretion, and nobody's really taken advantage of it. So it's not been a problem. But if somebody came to me and for their 3 trees wanted to plant 3 columnar oaks, I would strongly encourage them not to.
Well, I mean, the ordinance requires one high canopy, but I guess I'm just saying if this is a definition of a tree, of what would count in any consideration as a tree, shouldn't we include ones that aren't canopy? I mean, I thought the 15-foot height was the dividing line. I thought that was what determined it being.
I mean, like a columnar tree still has a defined canopy. Okay. I can still tell where that doesn't mean it has a wide canopy, but
but it would still say, consider that a canopy.
You can still say, here's the crown of the tree. This is,
okay,
you know, still a definable feature of the tree, the stem, the crown, the branches.
Okay, that's fine. In that case, that's fine. So we should change it to canopy so it's more consistent with the use of canopy throughout.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry either way. But
okay.
While we're changing things, yes, I'd probably use canopy.
Right. I think Commissioner LeGree has a question.
Yeah, before I get to Commissioner LeGree, I just want to recognize that Commissioner Ed Chernowski joined us at 9:50 a.m. Welcome aboard. We are going through version 2, and we're in the middle of almost concluding definitions. And by the way, when we do conclude definitions, we'll take a brief pause and go to the members of the public, specific to any feedback only on definitions. Commissioner Legree, please.
Yeah, I am looking at things from the vantage point of a homeowner. I'm having a rough go of it, but are we saying now that once a tree gets above 15 feet, it becomes a defined tree as opposed to a shrub or something else?
It has to be capable of growing to 15 feet. So it doesn't have to be 15 feet. So our planting requirements, I forget what the height is in this code, maybe 8 to 10 feet.
Yeah.
But say it's a red bud and it's only, or a dogwood, and the dogwood is only 8.5 feet tall. Well, it can be 20 feet tall given 50 years.
In fact, that's what we hope that we're doing with the homeowners, is to encourage the very thing you were talking about. But once that crepe myrtle gets to be 15 feet 1 inch tall, does it go into another category that is a do not abuse, do not cut, do not whatever without permission?
I think that's when you would look at the rest of the definition. So if it's one of the more shrubby crepe myrtles that doesn't have like a defined trunk and canopy, then, you know, and it's 15 feet tall, then we'd probably treat it as a shrub. Like, for example, a photinia. Those things, they're a shrub. You can grow a 20 to 30 foot tall hedge with a photinia. And we do have them around town. They will never, no matter how tall they get, be a tree. So.
But based on, I think Jay is saying the definition implies that they would be. Is that what you're saying, Jay?
Well,
I'm just saying that the definition, as a homeowner, I'm
Yeah.
reading this and trying to figure out what I need to do. And I don't have clarity. In fact, I have one outside my house. I have a 20-foot crepe myrtle that's just phenomenal. And it's like 3 different strands, which is just what Liz described.
Well, 3 is a lot different than like 20. And I mean, there are trees that, there's an Amelanchier, or a native small tree. You can get it in a multi-stem form where it comes with 10 stems. It's still a tree. Those situations are few and far in between. And what I typically have, usually I tell people to contact me, send me a picture. Or if you're really not sure and you want something definitive, you can always apply for the tree permit if you're doing other things. And I'll just send you an email and say, it's not a tree. You don't need a permit. I get a few of those a year and a few pictures. But for the most part, I'd say crepe myrtles are probably the #1 thing that the confusion is over.
Right.
Other than that, I don't get too many questions on tree versus shrub.
Okay. So I guess what I'm hearing is that if the homeowner has a tree, a shrub, a crepe myrtle that grows over 15 feet and he wants to trim it, wants to do things he shouldn't be doing to it, that we're saying he needs to contact you.
If there's any question, just like any permit, if you're not sure you need a permit for something, you should contact me, the building department, if it's something like that. But yeah. And I mean, it happens, but it's not super frequent. Also,
talk to
well,
go the other way. But
well, I was gonna say, keep in mind too, that most of this work is not done by the actual homeowner. Most of it is done by the contractor. So the contractors have a little bit better grasp on if something is a question mark and I need to be contacted, or if it's definitively a tree or a shrub. Versus not to say that we shouldn't make it simpler because it's mostly contractors, but you know, I don't get a whole lot of tree permits from property owners. They're generally contractors doing this work. So
that was another problem that I have. That was problem number 5 that I have talked to homeowners about, but we can get to that later on.
Thank
Go.
Okay. The other thing I'll mention is that, and I think Mary, you may have a question about shortening this a bit, but we added a definition for urban forest plan, since you may remember that in the first article, we talked about the fact that we now want to have one and have a status update of it every year. So I felt the need to add a definition of it. And Liz and I worked on this. I think I found the first sentence somewhere, and then she gave me the second 2 sentences. But Mary, you think we should simplify it?
Well, the way I read it, I believe it can be simplified and broadened. In the first sentence, it mentions something about management. The second sentence, it says something about management. And the third sentence says something about management. I thought maybe it should be condensed as much as a plan. I don't know what an action plan is, but a plan designed to promote best tree management practices, period. If you wanted to then continue and say thereby increasing public involvement and minimize risk to the public, maybe you could put that in. But I was going for brevity, and also in the definition, urban forest plan, I questioned whether it should be urban forest management plan.
I think you could use only the first, second, or maybe the first sentence, sorry, or maybe the first and the third sentence. The second sentence seems a little bit repetitive.
Okay.
Plus, I'm not sure we need the purpose in the definition.
Right. Okay.
But it's an action plan because it does provide actions, like tangible. It's not just theoretical stuff. An action plan like plant 50 new street trees per year. So I think the word action should be in there in some shape or form.
Well, so I would go probably with an action plan designed to promote best tree management practices.
Yeah, so something similar to the first sentence.
Yeah.
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 Combining the first and the third, right? And you would do it as one sentence, right? Yeah.
I would.
Okay, that's fine with me.
You need to put your goal in there, but that's easy.
Okay. So are we done with definitions? Do we get into the meat of it now?
Yeah, let's pause a minute and go to a member. We've only got one member of the public, the St. Clair family. Mary Alice, are you there?
Yeah, hi. I actually really don't have anything that I wanted to specifically speak about. I just wanted to be able to, if I had a comment, and I'll just be very honest with you, just because.
I lost her. Did everybody lose her?
Yeah, I can't hear.
Mary Alice, if you can hear us, you either muted yourself during the conversation or you dropped off. So you come back on, we'll go back to you. Again, what we were hopeful of is any comments specific to definitions. And with that, Commissioner Gay, let's move on to other items of Article 2, please.
Okay, so we've ended this what will now be the new Article 1 of general issues, and we're moving on to what will now be Article 3, regulation of trees on private property. I don't know why the spacing on the version that got it posted to the city has these weird page breaks, but anyway, this next page 7 is only the first clause 253.21, which is a species to be planted. And that's actually the same as wording in the first article about city trees. It's basically just been picked up from that, but this will apply to private trees as well, that we're saying we're defining that it should be native species and non-natives that have been approved by the city arborist, and that no tree classified as invasive by the Delaware Forest Service shall be planted. So this is where the specification of who defines an invasive comes in. Okay, any questions there?
Yeah.
Oh, Mayor just froze. Uh-oh. Is anybody else? There they are, I guess, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I froze for a minute. Are we unfrozen?
You're unfrozen.
What did we accomplish in that pause while I was off? Anything?
I just talked about the definition of the species to be planted, and the fact that that's wording is also in the article about public trees, and the invasives are as defined by the Delaware Forest Service. And there really aren't any changes in that. This has been the way it's been all along.
All right, thank you. And again, I want to apologize to Ms. St. Clair. Somehow you were dumped off, or your internet stopped working. So if you can get it working again, we would like to entertain your feedback. And otherwise, Commissioner Gay, if we don't get her back, maybe you could reach out to her.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. All righty, next.
Okay, next one. This is where we get into starting on line, I guess, page 8. So line 213, the minimum tree density requirements, which does not change. Hold on a minute. You know, it's essentially the same as what's in the current code. Although I'll ask a question, and I don't know, maybe Liz can answer this. I had a question from a homeowner recently that asked me where the standard of 26 trees per acre comes from. You know, and obviously this has been in there for 20 years since the first part of the ordinance was written, but and our 3 trees per lot is somewhat based on that. Do you know where that standard comes from?
I have no idea.
All right.
I mean, all I can think is that they broke it down by a 5,000 square foot lot, 1 tree in the front yard, and then 1 in kind of like each corner of the backyard.
Right, but the question was why 26 per acre as opposed to, I don't know, 30 per acre or 20 per acre or something.
Well, the 26 coincides with 3 per 5,000 square foot lot. Now, how the original creators of the tree code came up with 3 per lot, 5,000 square foot lot, I don't know.
Okay.
But isn't that true, Liz? The 3 trees per 5,000 square foot is the equivalent of 26 trees per acre.
Yeah, I think they got the 26 from the 3, not the 3 from the 26.
Right.
I guess if that makes any. That's my guess. I honestly have no clue where that. I've never heard of it. People don't talk about. I've never seen a minimum density requirement in any tree code before. So.
Really?
No.
Huh. Okay. Interesting. Well, and this has been there since the beginning of the tree ordinance. And what's changed in this one, again, the definition of defining a partial lot, you know, how you calculate a lot that's less than 5,000 or more than 5,000, all those calculations, nothing has changed there. What has changed in this new code is that previously the tree had to be, actually it says here 4, I think currently it may even be 3 inches, and it's not DBH, that should be caliper, and 12 feet in height. And we were going to change that to 2 inches of caliper and 8 feet in height because, and Liz can explain this probably better than I can, because it provides more flexibility and ease of installation for the homeowner.
Well, it's twofold. So I don't know how many people have tried to get a 3-inch tree planted, but they are not cheap and they're not readily available. Right. So when you say, I want a 2-inch tree, they might say, well, we have these 12 species in stock. And then you say, well, what about 3? And they'll say, well, we have these 3 species in stock. So the higher you go, the more specialty it gets and the more money it costs. And we're not interested in this costing people more money to plant trees. We want to make it more accessible. Mm-hmm. So the smaller size gives more choices as well as makes it just less of a financial burden on people. And then also the smaller the size, the more possible it is that a homeowner and, 2 or 3 people can plant a tree versus a 3-inch tree that can weigh a few 100 pounds. 2 inches is just lighter, smaller.
Right. Right.
Still
I've
difficult.
I've had several homeowners say that they're relieved by this because they had to shop for trees and were having difficulty finding the 3-inch.
Well, right now it's difficult to find anything, but yeah, the smaller the better. And 2 inches is a good size in between. It's what I prefer when we're planting trees for the city, the 2 to 2.5 inch range. Just large enough that it doesn't look like a twig that somebody's going to run over with a lawnmower or weed whack to death. But not so large that it costs $1,000.
Right.
And you can't find any.
And didn't you say the growth time is similar? In other words, that the larger ones kind of take more time to get acclimated and grow a little slower, and the 2-inch will grow as fast or something?
Yeah, so they've done millions of studies on that, but the smaller sizes typically end up outperforming the larger sizes because they lose so much root mass when they transplant them.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've had people in my other job that, had 8 to 10 inch trees planted because they wanted something instant. And then 10 years down the line, the 3-inch tree is bigger than the 3-inch tree is 10 inches and the 10-inch one is 11. So, or dead, one or the other.
So there's all sorts of benefits to changing this. Even though
I just looked up the existing code.
Yeah.
In terms of the size. And it says, in meeting the density requirements set forth in the section above, only evergreen or deciduous trees exceeding 3 inches caliper may be counted.
Right, it should be caliper.
But that's A. B is only small specimen trees exceeding 2 inches caliper. And then the C is only small specimen trees may be counted without size limitation. So it's kind of a 2 or a 3-inch caliper thing. And so this is either putting everything on the equal size scale here, 2 inches or 4 inches.
2, it should be 2. Like I say, the 4. I think the 4 might have been in the Planning Commission's version, but in the Law Oversight Committee, and again in conversations with Liz, we settled on 2 as being, for all the reasons she just named, as being a good number to include.
Thank you.
And
Commissioner,
we do have some comments, so you may want to.
Commissioner LeGree and then Commissioner Gossett. Commissioner LeGree.
I had a homeowner, didn't come out and say it, but I had a homeowner accuse us of being in cahoots with the landscapers because some of our requirements made it necessary for us to hire landscapers to dig a hole, bring out the tree, drop it in the hole because it was too big for a homeowner to do. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation because this ordinance should be homeowner defined. I mean, homeowner aimed, homeowner targeted. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Gossett.
Yeah, just a question of explanation here. We talked on minimum tree density. Line 214 says all lots used for residential purposes, whether zoned residential or not. And then in line 219, we say each single family residence lot in a residence district. And then in 226, we say each resident lot in a resident district. So I'm curious just to know why we separate that or define 1 and 2 in a resident district, but in the first one, we talk about the whole city. Because you could have a residential use in a commercial area and we build the 0 lot line buildings and there's no place for a tree.
Right. Well, that does come up, and those go to Parks and Shade Tree, right, Liz? Those cases.
Like a mixed use, you mean, where it's commercial on the bottom, residential apartment on top?
Yeah.
Sometimes and this is more of a zoning question, but sometimes they do have, I'm thinking of one that had a backyard setback because it backed up to residential.
Okay.
And then I'm thinking of another that didn't, and the one that backed up, I think they had a problem with the front yard tree. But they were able to put one in the backyard. They went to Park and Shade. And then the other one that was completely commercial went to Park and Shade. But like I said, I mean, that's 2 in 6 years. So.
Okay, if it's not a problem, I just didn't understand the logic behind it, or if there was logic. So.
The one thing this really would affect more so than the one off of the mixed use would be, the key is in that part where it says dwelling unit. And I think when I first started, I actually had to talk to Glenn about this. Dwelling unit is defined in the zoning code, I believe.
Yes.
And it pretty much, so how it affects like residential property would be if you have a garage apartment. So you have 2 dwelling units, right? You have one house, one garage apartment that has separate sleeping, eating, and cooking facilities. So if we have a condo complex with 100 apartments, then they would have to have 200 trees. If we have a hotel with efficiency units, right? So they have little kitchenettes in them, they would have to have 2 trees per unit. So that's really where it could make a big difference, not so much on the mixed use where we have one apartment up top.
Okay.
And this actually comes straight out of the existing code, but I don't understand 2 about commercial or mixed use shall have at least 2 trees. Okay, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I guess the problem is what requirements can there be for commercial? Any commercial? As you say, there's no room for them, but
Well, that's not always true though, because sometimes if they back up to residential, they do have setbacks.
Right.
It all becomes if we want to make the commercial property owners, right? Because most of the businesses, I don't know how the cost gets translated, but the property owners basically carry their share. So if residential, if you have a house and you need to take out a tree because say it's hazardous or dying, and you have to meet minimum tree density, why should somebody putting in a huge commercial building covering all the land, they have a higher environmental impact, they are bringing a lot of people here, should they have to have essentially the equivalent of the 26 trees per acre? Or should businesses and commercial properties be exempt?
Yeah, I think this is a great discussion to have, because while the reality is that most commercial properties don't have the room for them, except hotels, because they have to have only 50% lot coverage. So technically in their parking lot, they could put some trees, or on the ones that back up to residential because of the setbacks. But other than that, you have a lot that aren't required. But the question remains, should those developers, should those property owners contribute to the city's canopy as a whole? And in that case, would there be a requirement to fund trees elsewhere in the city as their contribution?
Well, I think if you go back to, the beginning of the draft here, where you talk about the findings and the purpose and all that.
Right.
I think the argument lies that they should have to contribute if we're taking that. It shouldn't be any different whether you're a residential property owner or you're a commercial property owner. If we're saying trees contribute to our character and set us apart from everyone else, and they're a vital component, I don't know how that changes from commercial to residential.
Right. So, and then would there be a requirement here in the tree code for that? I mean, it's essentially mitigation, isn't it? Isn't it a sort of fee in lieu of mitigation almost?
Yes. Yes. So they just end up paying the fee, essentially, if they can't fit any trees.
So that's my question. Should there be a requirement to put trees and then have it dealt with as a fee in lieu of mitigation? Or should we say at the outset, we should have some requirement at the outset that for commercial properties without natural area, they'll make a contribution of X to the city's trees? There's several different ways to go about it.
I think it's easier if we just have it's X amount of trees, and then that can be dealt with in terms of a fee in lieu.
Okay.
I think that's simpler.
But you think we need to clean up the language about 2 trees per dwelling unit based on your example of the condos and hotels that you mentioned?
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't know if everybody agrees or disagrees with it. I mean, if we just want to stick with trees per square foot of land, that's the disconnect there, is that if you think about it, so a residential lot, say over on Oak Avenue, that has a main house and a garage apartment on 5,000 square feet, it's going to have more coverage than 50%. Okay. Just by virtue, they almost always do. Okay. Or at least 50%. They have to have 4 trees, but a single family house on a 5,000 square foot lot only has 3. So the logic doesn't necessarily make sense with the trees per dwelling unit to me. I think it's simpler to do if we want to include commercial properties. I think it's simpler to do it per square feet of land, whether the number remains the same, 3 per 5,000 or more or less, but to have one go by square foot and one go by dwelling unit doesn't make sense.
Okay, yeah. So then basically the square footage you would think would just apply to every property in the city, no matter how it's zoned.
Well, I think that's a discussion for the mayor and commissioners.
That's one thing to make it more equitable and easier to understand.
Yes, I think it's just, it's simpler that way. And then depending on what you choose, it doesn't place a higher burden. Like, to me, having a condo complex have to plant, 100 trees.
Yeah, I did it. Yeah.
Seems silly.
Right. Okay.
Well, we've got 2 commissioners. If you don't mind, let's pause. And Commissioner Chernowski, Commissioner Sharp, and then Commissioner Gossett. Commissioner Chernowski, please.
Thanks. I don't want to derail this, and it probably this same conversation I think is going to happen with the stormwater management task force, but we may want to incorporate green roof requirements on commercial or other green infrastructure things that may be in lieu of planting trees. Or it's just something that I think we may want to think of. A lot of cities are starting to require green roofs. That's something we may want to consider here on commercial buildings.
Thank you, Ed. Commissioner Gossett? No, I'm sorry, Commissioner Sharp, please.
I just wanted to clarify on the issue of commercial versus residential. Have we come to consensus that or are we still in discussion about whether or not a commercial designation would be treated differently?
I think you're still discussing, right?
Still discussing.
I think that's an ongoing. I don't know that we're even going to resolve it today. I don't know if, Susan, at one point you want to withdraw and come back with more organization on how to approach this topic, because this is a biggie, I think.
Yeah, this is a biggie, and this is one that I don't know that there's ever been. I take Liz's point about the dwelling unit, but at the same time, I take her point about wanting to have requirements citywide. So I think she seemed to say we could have one requirement for all properties citywide, and then deal with the commercial that doesn't have room for one as a fee in lieu of mitigation issue. And so that's a simple way to deal with it, I guess.
Commissioner Sharp, anything further?
Well, I guess I keep looking for the fundamental principle on this one, which to me really revolves around, do the rules apply equally between commercial and residential properties? And I think we have to answer that question first, because if you get that answer, then doesn't it make the execution and implementation a bit more clear? if our real goal here is to simplify, to me, you have to really bring it down to the core issues and get those answers streamlined. But I might be misreading this, so if anybody can help me make it more clear in my mind, that would be great.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let's go to Commissioner Gossett and then Commissioner Bennett. Commissioner Gossett.
Yeah, I think we should also agree with Commissioner Sharnowski of look at perhaps a green roof incentive or stormwater management incentives. But then also the first decision is this defined as zoning or is it defined by use? In the sense of if you have a business license, is that a commercial operation? Or is it only limited to designed in zoning districts? Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett.
Yeah, I somewhat agree with what everybody said, but to me as a homeowner, this whole area to me seems onerous. I mean, I just want to know, I've got a 5,000 square foot lot, I need 3 trees.
Right.
And, you know, going through this, it just becomes, we're all confused about it. So, you know, when it comes time for the homeowners to look at these sort of things, to me, it's just almost way too onerous. And I'm just wondering, have we ever looked at other cities that have done this well? Other tree cities that have ordinances that we can look at without getting into some of this minutia? Thanks.
I don't know that we have done that recently. I know I believe when this was first created, yes, they looked at a multitude of other city tree ordinances and handpicked the best, if you will, of the ordinances and compiled them into one unit.
Right. I mean, I'll just say, you know, other than beach overcrowding, this was the biggest topic when I ran that came up all the time is our tree ordinance. And I jokingly, I have an issue myself with a tree. And it just needs, I just think we need to be very clear about, you know, the whole crepe myrtle discussion, for instance. There's not a resident that doesn't think that's a tree. You know, that's not I mean, it's a tree in their mind, I'm sure. So I just think we need to be a little more definitive here and simpler. So I agree with everyone's thought of trying to simplify this. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Go ahead, Susan.
Well, I mean, this is one of the areas that would truly benefit from code review because, you know, they may be able to know, you know, what are the standard of 26 per acre and the way we have it. And I do think we, you know, despite the fact that there's a calculation in there about, you know, proportional lots over or under 5,000, essentially it does state very clearly that the minimum tree density is 3 trees on a 5,000 square foot lot. So I don't know that that's hard to understand. And I do think you have to have a formula in there for lots that aren't 5,000 square feet. So I don't know that that's the difficult part. I think the difficult part, or maybe this is the way to simplify it on the commercial side is to have, I think what Liz is saying is to have all of them, the requirement the same for every lot in the city. And then those that can't meet it would pay into the city's tree fund. Assuming that we want to continue with minimum density. Do we want to continue with the minimum density requirement at all? I think so, don't we?
I would say yes to that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the main question we're asking related to businesses is, do all the commissioners think there should be some sort of tree requirement for commercial zone properties? Whether it's a fee in lieu of mitigation, whether it's actually planting a tree, whatever it may be. I think that's the question we answer first, and then we answer, should it just be exactly the same as residential, 3 per 5,000? Or should there be some adjustment made to that? I mean, I've worked in municipalities that only had commercial tree code requirements. They didn't have any on the residential. So, and I've worked in places where it was just residential, like, you know, so it just depends on what you all are thinking.
I like the thought of the commercial contributing to our tree canopy, even if it were mitigation elsewhere. but preferably populating street trees or something if they can't squeeze it anywhere. Anybody that's going to have a parking lot, I think is going to have a bump out or a median or something probably capable of trees. And I think it would be good, likely to require a minimum so that they do contribute to our canopy. Commissioner Sarnowski, please.
Yeah, I guess my question would be for Liz, what would trigger this requirement for commercial properties? I mean, essentially, you've got every business on Rehoboth Avenue, right? Every lot would now require 3 trees or mitigation. But what would trigger that? If someone wants to replace a window, are they now required to plant 3 trees or pay mitigation or pay a fee? I think that would be helpful to understand.
Sure. So I think you missed
Well,
the
that
part
would be up to the commissioners to decide.
Well, we missed the part in the beginning, I think, during Commissioner Gay's intro where we talked about what triggers it, and that we've gone through different iterations. In the current code, it's 500 square foot, an addition. And then at one point in a draft, it was a dollar value. I want to say the Planning Commission, and it was 20,000.
Right.
And the point we had discussed was that 20,000 could be, I mean, a kitchen renovation will be over 20,000. It could be a bathroom. And that didn't seem fair to pull in tree requirements for somebody that wanted to put new cabinets in their kitchen. And so then I think we settled on land disturbance to be discussed later in in today's meeting if we get to it. Because of exactly what you said. A small change or interior renovations shouldn't necessarily trigger it. I mean, commercial, the ones that have triggered it in just my memory have been either new construction. In addition, we've had somebody that added like a apartment on top of a commercial thing that pulled in 2 trees. Had a couple of those actually. And then trying to think, removal. So if they have trees on a commercial property and they have to remove trees, they might have planting requirements.
Right. Okay.
Can I ask one other question of Liz?
Sure.
And I can't think of any commercial properties that have this, but it is becoming more popular that commercial properties are putting trees, gardens, and stuff on top of their roofs. What does that? If someone puts a tree on top of a commercial building, does that trigger some height? Does that make the tree part of the height of the building? Or is there any other odd things that we're not thinking about that it may trigger?
I mean, that would probably be a building official question. I don't see how, because if you have a 100-foot tall tree on a residential property, we don't tell you have to cut it back down to 35 or whatever the height is.
Yeah. The only difference would be this would be
on the roof,
on top of a structure.
It would be an interesting discussion because it is I've taken in previous jobs, we've actually had clients who had trees on their green roofs, whether they were in planters or in the media themselves. They were a pain to take care of. Can tell you that much. But I don't know. My inclination would be that they shouldn't count, but Matt might have Matt and Glenn might say differently.
Well, that's kind of an interesting scenario. My perspective has always been from ground level, looking up at trees, but not as high as on top of a rooftop.
Yeah, I just wonder if green roofs in general, I think it's a great idea. It's a great idea for incentive and everything, but I mean, where is that going to fall? Is that going to fall in the tree code? Is that going to fall in the zoning code? Is it going to, because a green roof isn't necessarily a tree, right? Some of them can be other forms of greenery. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say in answer to Commissioner Schnauz's question is there's a clause in here generally that if a property does not meet the requirement as of the date of the adoption of the ordinance, it does not have to unless it's transferred or it's built upon or something like that. So I would assume if we adopt a new requirement for all commercial properties, that all commercial properties are not instantly going to get have that requirement, that there would be something to trigger it. But where do we put an incentive for if we have the basic requirement right now? The way it looks is what Liz was saying. The way to simplify it is to have the basic requirement for all lots, and then have commercial do this fee, and we'll get to the fees later in the discussion, to contribute to the city's tree canopy. Is that what we want to do? And if so, where do the incentives for green come in, or do they come in here?
Commissioner Gay, do you think it would be prudent to pause a minute on this and have you bring back a draft proposal for us to talk about?
I mean, I can certainly do that. Again, I think it's gonna require some research, and this is an area where I think somebody who deals with tree codes may, off the top of their head, be it no more than I will discover in 3 weeks. So I just throw that out there. I may need some expert consultation along the way.
I'm talking about two things. One is the green roof concept, but the other is our conversation revolving around commercial.
I mean, is there a consensus that we want to have one standard for the entire city and then deal with the rest of what doesn't fit that elsewhere?
That certainly sounds like the most simple approach to me.
Yeah. Okay.
I would agree with that also, but what is that standard? Is it constant for residential and commercial use, or that's to the details, as it were?
Commissioner Czerniawski, your hand's still up?
Yeah. Just a comment to Commissioner Gay, like, where does green roof and incentives fall in? I imagine that would be part of the stormwater task force discussion, because green roofs really try to mitigate runoff. And so I think that's the appropriate place for that topic to probably be discussed.
Aaron, is Kevin on? Do you all have an outline from AECom on the topics? Might this be one of the topics for discussion within the Stormwater Utility Task Force? Do you have any idea?
City manager on right now, so.
Mayor, he's not on, and as of yet, we're still drafting an outline.
All right, thank you very much. So to be determined, Ed. Anything else, Ed?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Take your hand down if you would. Susan, go ahead.
Okay, well, in that case, I can certainly work on revising this part for all lots, and then did you say also bring in some information about green roofs, or are you saying just work on language to?
Well, I would suggest having a conversation with Kevin Williams to see what the extent of the conversations and direction the Stormwater Utility Task Force is going, so that there's not necessarily duplication of efforts unless there's a desire to do that.
Okay, that's fine. One of the next, just below this about minimum tree density, is one of the issues that we talked about in our committee quite a lot. And I'm not even sure that Liz is going to be 100% happy with the wording that was here, because I don't think I ended up changing it. Line 233, where it talks about the types of trees to be planted. And this is something that came up when the Law Oversight Committee did their revision, and is to say that the first tree shall be a high canopy tree. This will be, that will make high canopy a requirement going forward, that at least one be high canopy. The second shall be a high canopy or other native, and the third can be any permitted. And I know that Liz talked to our group quite a bit about that. Believe it or not, that this would be really confusing to people, because people don't know what's native, they don't know what's canopy. And I think where we came out was that the city, Liz would maintain a list of permitted trees in all of these categories. And so it's like somebody would pick one from column A, one from column B, one from column C. But there is still some feeling, I think, that is this the appropriate wording, or does it need to be simplified at all? Because I think one comment we got from the public was, does it mean that the first high canopy has to be native because the second one has to be high canopy or other native? These kinds of things. Liz, what are your thoughts on that currently? I can't remember where we came out in the group.
I think this is more confusing than what we have now for the sub requirements. And that's why it's not the content of it necessarily that I disagree with. It just, this is difficult to understand to me. I don't think any normal person will be able to read this and say, oh, I'm taking out one tree, so let me include my tree planting plan and follow these rules. Okay. It's going to put me back in the same scenario now where I'm having to get back to them and say, okay, well, here's 4 bullet points, select this species, minimum this size, put it in this location.
Well, and I did look, and this is the wording that comes from law oversight. I'm trying to remember if the planning commission had anything on this one. But I mean, I think we do want to make one a high canopy tree, right?
I don't even know what a high canopy tree is anymore. We don't have a definition of it. Yeah. I don't think.
Wait a minute.
That was my question.
There was one along the line. It must have just gotten, because we debated the height versus width for a while, and I can't remember where it came out, but.
Commissioner Gossett?
Yeah, it's just that 233.45, what we're speaking about, it's confusing to me because I looked, we don't have a high canopy tree defined. And then also it says when applicable on any lot. How do we determine if it's applicable? Again, trying to use from a user standpoint. And then the last line or last sentence says, larger lots shall be subject to the same proportional sequential trees. Kind of larger than what? We don't define, is this a 5,000 foot lot or, it just kind of circles around there. So I trying to, if I want to plant a tree, what does this mean? Is it when applicable? Who determines that? And then on any lot, what size is the lot? And then if we have larger lots, what larger than what? So.
Yeah. I mean, I think it does mean larger than 5,000, but this is one, I remember the law oversight committee talking about this for months and around, and this is, this is what they came up with, and this is what we have to work with. But I do think it's one of the unsolved issues. But I think the intent was to, again, we're sort of going for quality over quantity by specifying that one be a high canopy, and that, also to try to emphasize natives, but that to give the arborists the flexibility of permitting other species as well, and just having the right mix. I mean, that's really what it's all about. But how best to say it?
Liz, you said that this is more confusing than currently. How is it currently applied, or what formula do you use?
Currently, you can have maximum of 1/3 evergreen, so one evergreen tree, which is listed out on the list in green font. You can have a maximum of one small species per 5,000 square feet. So if you're bigger than 5,000 square feet, see where this says sequential, it doesn't say that in the current one. So like, say you have a 6,000, whatever, it triggers a 4th tree, you can have 2 small species. This one, you would have to have 2 high canopy trees.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the 3rd tree would just be, I usually type in like a medium large deciduous tree. So a maple, a birch, something like that. I mean, I'm thinking maybe we can just change it. If we maintain where this gets confusing is that we're saying what all 3 trees have to be. selected from certain sections of a list, and maybe we just say a minimum of 1 tree shall be high canopy native tree. And that'll just have to be close enough to getting us what we desire.
And then the other 2 would just be from a list of permitted trees.
Yeah. I mean, we might have to be okay then with getting 2 red buds and a maple, or, you know, a red bud, a holly, and a maple.
Mhm.
Elsewhere,
But
don't we
it's-
define they have to be above, what, 25 feet? Or can reach a
15.
Let's
15?
tree, period, yeah. If we're gonna,
I want to get to Commissioner Sharp's comment in a minute, but let me just, it's interesting, Liz, to hear you say it's easier in the current one, because the way I look at the current one, first of all, there's like 4 different categories, and it has evergreen or deciduous 3 inches caliper, small specimen 2 inches caliper, 1 small specimen for each 5,000. I mean, to me, that's more confusing. But I understand that this does not necessarily improve it. This is just a different confusion. But all I'm saying is it's been a confusion all this time. So we're trying to fix that.
yes, and this doesn't, it is semi-complicated now, and I get why. I don't understand the evergreen requirement the way it is now, but I get the definition between the small species and the other deciduous species. We don't want a lot with 3 red buds, right? We're trying to get the canopy where we want it. We want something, an oak, a maple, a birch, one of those taller native trees.
Seems to me you could clarify the current language just by letting everything be the same caliper or something. There ought to be a way to simplify it. Commissioner Gossett, did you have your hand still up? Did you have anything else?
Oh, sorry, I didn't take it down.
Nope, you're good. Commissioner Sharp?
Oh, my heart really goes out to the residents because I'm part of this discussion and now I'm really getting confused. But what I'm trying to figure out at this moment is, are we still committed to having canopy trees required for new construction in the front yards? Or have we ever had that intent? Somebody help me.
Now you're saying in the front yard versus anywhere on the property?
Yes, because I thought canopy trees are really more intended, and I could certainly be wrong about this, more intended to be the gateway trees, if you will, to a residential street. But I may be wrong and completely off base, that the best place for a canopy tree is in a front yard.
Well, I'm in agreement that canopy trees should be a requirement because those are the tall ones that with a widespread crown. I have never given thought to location on the property.
There is a requirement for at least 1 tree in the front. That's true. I don't think it must be elsewhere in the tree planting requirement section or something. I don't think it says that it has to be the canopy tree.
And that's helpful to me because I thought Commissioner Gay said something very, very important a few minutes ago, and I need you to tell me if I picked it up correctly. I think I heard you say we are trying to transition from quantity of trees to quality of trees.
Right.
If that's a core fundamental, to me, what has to couple that is it's an acknowledgement that we're going to have less trees on private property. But in those trees, we would have a better quality outcome. And if indeed having a strong canopy is important to us, do we or do we not have to answer the question, in an environment of lesser density of trees, is a canopy tree important in a front yard?
I can say the current practice is we don't dictate which type of species goes where, just one tree in the front yard. Most people put the small species in the front yard, because by the time, so even though it's a 15-foot setback, by the time you allow the front porch encroachment, the driveway, and the walkway, you are lacking in space. Whereas the backyard, you have 15 feet and no driveway. So you have more green space back there for roots and such.
Interesting.
I mean, some people do put them in the front yard, but that's less common.
You're saying overall there's more likely to be more room in the back?
Yes, there's definitely more room in the back, and that contributes to more of the larger trees. For example, standard new build might be, say they have no trees, might be a redbud, dogwood, something small flowering tree in the front, and then 2 river birches, 1 in each back corner.
So I completely understand that and accept it. So at some point, Commissioner Gay, if you can help me to understand as we work our way all the way through this and come to the end of it, exactly what is it that we're going to do that signifies we will have better quality?
And that's what we need to resolve. But for that reason, I'm in favor of the new requirement of high canopy. Hearing the practical realities of space makes me think we can't require it in the front. But I think what I hear Liz saying is that the high canopy would be the requirement, but there wouldn't be the other trees on the lot would just come from a permitted list. We wouldn't specify what they have to be, whether they're evergreen or native or what. I will say this overall for the whole quality versus quantity discussion. I think the fact that we're emphasizing natives is a plus. I think that Liz is going to maintain a list of permitted, it's a comprehensive list, right, of permitted trees?
The one we have now? Yeah. I mean, it's,
and the one you will have. I mean, or what I mean, that you keep it up to date, that people can't just plan anything, but they do have to select from a comprehensive list.
Well, there's not much to keep up to date right now because it's just natives, but the question mark would be the cultivars, what we want to do about those. Dwarf cultivars, and so like a southern magnolia, it can grow 60 feet tall. There are cultivars that get 20 feet tall. Mm-hmm. So we have to be careful in the native one. The non-cultivar would be possibly on a high canopy tree list, but Bracken's Brown Beauty cultivar would be on the quote unquote other list.
But that's where your expertise comes in. That's where you maintain the list and you tell people they have to select from a list.
Yeah, but I don't list all the cultivars now. I mean, that's like never, I have about 1,000-page book that lists every tree and every cultivar. So like, I mean, and to be frank, sometimes if they put a tree in and it doesn't have a tag on it, it might be hard to tell cultivars, like, okay, the tree's 10 foot tall. Well, is it this cultivar, that cultivar, non-cultivar?
Then what do they select from? I mean, how are people going to select a tree?
They go to the list and they say, okay, well, it depends. A lot of times, almost every time, they're using landscapers. Yep. Yeah. And they go to the list and I'll say, you have to have one tree located on your property, minimum size 3 foot or 3 inches, 12 foot tall, selected from the trees in black font on the attached list.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like the direction I think we're headed there, and that requiring a high canopy tree, defining what it is, and then allowing flexibility for placement on the lot. Commissioner Legree, you got your hand up?
We need a lot of flexibility because Delmarva power lines are running on 2 sides of my lot, my property, and a lot of other properties. So that goes into the mix. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, do we
Just one last thought. Liz, when you were talking about, and so rightfully, about the challenges for people to try to put a canopy tree in the front yard, is that the custom if the lot is larger than 5,000 square feet, as well as?
Well, the front yard setback doesn't change.
Right.
I mean, they might have more space if they have a wider lot, they're gonna have larger side yard setbacks.
Okay.
But
Okay.
then you have to think, the largest side yard setback is gonna be where the driveway is. So your 10 or 11 feet on one side is taken up by driveway, and then you're 6 foot on the other side. And you can have walkways,
Yeah.
right? You can have walkways in that setback. So even that space isn't 100% available, which is usually why the front yard tree goes, say if you're looking at a house and the driveway is on the right-hand side with the 10 to 11 foot side setback, and then left-hand side is the 6 foot. Usually they go kind of in that front left corner. So they get a little bit of the root space on the side yard, and then they get the root space on the front yard.
Okay. And my last question is, it's back to the green roof concept. I had an individual who's purchased a vacant lot, and they were asking, what do we do currently if they design a home with a green roof?
What do you mean? What does the city do in
Well,
terms of what?
I mean, can you build a house in a residential area with a green roof?
I don't know. That wouldn't be a question for me.
Well, we do have minimum roof pitches, and so unless you can put a green roof on a pitch like this, it probably disallows it. So,
Well, and I think that's really good that we talk about green roofs that Commissioner Shanowski brought up, because it's becoming something that I think people are going to want. Absolutely. In the near future. And do we really, with our situation with stormwater management, do we really do ourselves any service by, not allowing something like that? So it's just an area that is sticky, but it's going to be coming to us at some point in the near future.
I think it's a very good conversation, and frankly, I think it's very complex, because there was a reason that pitches were put in a minimum pitch, trying to get away from those flat roofs that were being built and designed a decade or more ago. So as you can imagine, the ability to go flat, you don't want to make sure that it violates any height restrictions or adds to floor area ratio, et cetera. So again, it's a lot to have in that conversation, I think.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sharp, you good? Anybody?
I'm good.
Thank you. Commissioner Gay?
I did notice that the next line down, 237, does say new tree plantings to be counted to meet tree density requirements must be selected from a permitted list maintained by the city arborist. So then, does the simple fix here become that not even the first tree, but one tree? So starting with 233, that one tree shall be a high canopy, and all other required trees to be counted must be selected from a permitted list of the city arborist, and sort of collapse those two?
That makes sense to me. If we could have a tree list that's kind of just 2 categories instead of 3, I would consider that a simplification. I mean, we can't do away with all the sub requirements, right? But we've just discussed why. So we can lessen them where possible, and going from 3 to 2 works for me.
Okay, and going back to a question that Commissioner Gossett raised, I don't know why it's when applicable on a lot. So I guess that would, Yeah, that's in the LOC version too. So I guess that, would that just come out, that phrase? See Glenn
Well, we
nodding.
do need to decide when it is applicable.
It's applicable on all lots, right?
Anytime,
Oh, I see. So that refers to the fact that there are situations where you don't have to, well, no, this is minimum density.
yeah, so if somebody has 20 dogwoods in their backyard and they don't have a tree in the front yard, and they want to take out one of those 20 dogwoods because it has anthracnose, okay?
Yeah.
Dying. Theoretically, they wouldn't, I mean, taking aside the tree for tree replacement that we haven't gotten to.
Mhm.
In the current code, they had 20 dogwoods in the backyard and they had to take out one. They would have to put in 2 trees to meet the minimum density sub requirements.
Mhm.
Because there's a maximum of 1 small species in the current code. So they have to put one in the front yard and then they have to put a canopy tree somewhere.
Mhm.
So in this, it would be, in the kind of change we just talked about to the proposal, they would have to put in a minimum of 1 high canopy native tree in the front yard.
No, we didn't say in the front. We just said,
Well, they don't have one in the front yard.
well, they
Isn't-
have to put
and
something
that's-
in the front. Yeah.
Isn't it on here somewhere? It has to be in the front yard.
Somewhere else,
Within-
something has to be in the front. Yeah.
within
I
the
guess my
front
point is
setback.
that the sub requirements trigger the not meeting the sub requirements, but meeting the density. Does that trigger planting? Say 20 pine trees. They have a wooded backyard and nothing in the front. Do they still have to plant the front yard tree? So
So
that's
is-
where we need to decide applicable.
Okay. So you think we do need the when applicable?
Well, we need to decide, we need to decide what is, when it is applicable, whether or not that stays there.
Right, and that's covered elsewhere. I mean, that's covered further up in the code. The question is whether or not that phrase belongs here or not.
I have a feeling that's more of a Glenn question. I don't see any use for it, but maybe there's some technical.
Yeah, I tend not to see a use for it either. I mean, as I was listening to Liz describe, different scenarios that she faces, maybe there is a requirement for it. So I'm a little confused as well. My initial reaction was it's minimum density requirements. It's always applicable, but Liz deals with much more complicated scenarios than I think we envision typically.
Well, 95% of mine are uncomplicated and simple, but there's always the 5% that you look at and you kind of scratch your head.
Well, maybe we should leave it for now. I don't know. But at any rate, we can collapse 1 and 2 and have a lot simpler phrase, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so here's the next controversy. Mayor and I have talked about this. Line 240, a line tree may not count. So here's the backstory on that. It doesn't count now. Didn't count in the Planning Commission edition, and it does count in the law oversight version, but the chairman of the committee wrote a dissenting opinion that he didn't think it should count. And when our committee talked about it, we didn't think they should count. And I think the reasons were, and it's interesting because Liz said something earlier today that made me think, well, maybe this is not an issue. And that is that she's never had property owners, never had any disputes. But that's really why it has, that's why we left it in as not counting, because there's the possibility one homeowner wants to take it out, the other one doesn't. So that changes the one homeowner's density because each one only counts for half. So you end up with calculations and combinations that aren't workable. So, but at the same time, I guess there was some feeling in the committee that in their committee, law oversight committee, that it preserved, that if it counts, it's more likely to be preserved. And they're more likely to be big trees if they're on the line because they're further away from the house. I get that. So this is a toughie. I don't,
Well, Susan, you and I have talked briefly about it, and I kind of agree with that last statement. I do believe that the way it is could promote cutting down of the Leiden tree as a possibility. I'm not sure the perfect solution, but I've been thinking of even if half of it, 0.5 of that tree went to the each property, I might be happy with that. Of course, that doesn't mean they still wouldn't have to meet the 3 trees and to achieve 3.5 trees. But they're liable to have 2 line trees that could be the equivalent of 1. I would like to use an example of my yard. I have a 100-year-old oak in my yard that when it was planted, there's no doubt it was my tree. It was on my property. And over the years, it grew so big with a 4-foot diameter base that now a quarter of it is crossing the line and on the city's property. That is a line tree that's absolutely gorgeous. And the canopy of that extends 50 feet over to the other property and overhangs over that. So to me, there is value to a line tree. And I'm just not sure that we should be dismissing calculating those, especially when they can grow to such an enormous size. There's my little spiel. Anybody?
Well, keep in mind with the line trees the way it is currently, they don't have mitigation. So there are no planting requirements when you do remove one. So it goes both ways, right? It doesn't count for you, but it doesn't count against you either.
Well, I'd be comfortable having it count against you if you take it out, if at least part of it's counted.
Right, but it wouldn't count against just one person. It would count against 2 or 3. I've had a tree in a back corner of a lot that was on 4 properties, right?
Well, most likely it wouldn't come down unless there was agreement between both property owners.
I don't know about that.
Well, yes, for the city's purposes, I'm not issuing a tree removal permit unless we have permission of all of the tree owners.
You did say
Anybody?
you usually get it, right?
I can think of one time where they didn't. The only time they would maybe not agree would be new construction, where the neighbor, like the tree, they want to take it out for the new construction, and then the neighbor doesn't want it out because they don't want the construction to, like, on top, it's just piling on top of things.
Well, this lends to a unique situation that I've seen time and time and time again, and I've even been to constituents' houses. They've got a line of trees on their property that overhang the fence. So it's not even necessarily a line tree. Could be, but not necessarily a line tree. And a new builder comes on there and he clear cuts at the property line straight up. This has happened again and again and again. And there's absolutely nothing that we can do to prevent that I know of. And maybe counting it as a line tree helps promote keeping it. I don't know what the solution is.
No, the whether or not it's a line tree and it counts doesn't really make a difference in terms of the however many reasons we have that you can remove a tree. 7 currently. I think it's increased in the draft. I mean, it might change people's minds on what type of flaws they're willing to mitigate in the tree, if it counts for them. So that it could lead to more trees remaining, possibly. I mean, I think if you got to think, when you have a line tree, you're still responsible for pruning what's on your side. You still have tree roots. You still have that tree taking up space on your property. But it becomes very convoluted on how the city counts it. What if just a little bit of the trunk is hanging over onto the other property, 2 inches out of 20? You can get into disagreements there on how much, but I get 50%, but I only have to take care of this tiny little piece and the other person only gets 50%. I think no matter what, you're going to have disagreements on the line trees.
We've got Commissioner Legree.
What if we just let both property owners take advantage of counting the tree? Make it like a football game. If you touch the line, you're out of bounds. Or in our case, if you touch the line, you're in bounds. And that would really make line trees more valuable. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Gossett and then Commissioner Sharp.
Yeah, I agree. I think, Mayor, as the description you shared with us about the tree was planted originally probably in your yard, but as it grew, it became a line tree. I would surmise that a majority of the line trees are very mature trees, and perhaps that we could use that, you know, a line tree should be counted proportionately over a certain diameter or something of that nature to preserve those larger trees. But again, I think the majority, I have 2 on my property that are line trees, but they're probably 60, 70-year-old trees. And I certainly wouldn't want to take them down or be forced to take them down. But I just think that that's, you know, we're talking about incentives, and I don't know that we've come up with any incentives yet in this plan. And maybe that's one of them. We have to also remember, I think, that when, you know, the 26 acres and what have you, this tree ordinance was originally written, I believe, in 1988. Now it's gone through a lot of changes, certainly since 1988, but so has the needs of our community and the way houses are being constructed and swimming pools and driveways and all of that. So it's a balance that I think we may need to look at as to looking to the future and against of that canopy trees. You know, maybe 3 trees per lot is not the right mix anymore, but we should encourage those canopy trees to maintain and larger trees be planted. It just, you know, it's the needs of our community are changing, and the way builders are building and are changing. And I don't know, Susan, has that been a part of the conversation at all in any of these iterations? Do you know?
In terms of the number, or?
Well, just how houses are being built. I mean, it's been, you know, people are building to the lines and maximum capacities and what have you, and adding pools and adding, you know, driveways. And so I don't know if that, the consideration of where we're putting trees and also the mitigation of, you know, well, I'll pay X number of dollars so the city can plant a tree, perhaps running out of space in even our public parks to plant trees. I mean, the aspect of a park, it's sometimes to go, you know, play frisbee or walk your dog or kind of stuff. If you got too many trees in the park, that's sort of impossible, or it becomes harder.
I've not heard people complain about the 3 trees in terms of the density. What I've heard more, I mean, quite often, is the whole mitigation around having to replace those inches of tree. You know, when they take out a big tree and they have to replace it with the same number of inches, so they suddenly have to plant 12 trees, which is completely unrealistic. And that's one of the things that we hope this ordinance cleans up. That whole calculation has changed dramatically. But
maybe we could find some type of incentive for line trees, you know, over a certain height or diameter.
Yeah, I mean, I think I see the value in line trees. I think the reason that that it hasn't been included is because I guess the downside is somebody takes one out and then it affects the density of everybody, potentially of other property owners, and it was just hard to manage. But
so that would be an incentive not to take it out if it affects everybody.
Yeah, well, what's the incentive that it count?
Thank you. Commissioner Sharp,
Just
and
a
then
quick
Commissioner Legree. Go ahead.
Just a quick clarification, Liz, did you say that line 240 on the line trees is currently a problem for you, or it is not a problem?
I mean, I can think of a few times that people push back against, like, kind of like what the mayor said, a really large line tree.
Right.
But most of the line trees I see are usually like saplings, kind of where they've grown up like a little no man's land between 2 properties of like wild cherries that are 8 inches diameter or stuff like that. But it's not caused too many issues that I've seen. I mean, the issue in counting them, we'd have to do tree perm. I'm just trying to think in our system how, like, everything is done by property, right? By single address. So trying to link together two properties with individual permits would require some finagling, I think, on our end. Not to say it couldn't be done or wouldn't be worth it, but it's just, I think that's part of the reason we've always left it out.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Legree?
I'm confused. I thought small line trees were not a problem. And so maybe I'm thinking the wrong thing, but a good size line tree, you have both owners are having to take care of it. And I think we should do everything I agree with Commissioner Gossett. We should do everything we do to protect and preserve those big canopy trees that sit on the line no matter what it takes. Thanks, Mayor.
Well,
Commissioner Sharp, go ahead.
Just dovetailing on what Commissioner Legree just said, if we are truly accepting, which it sounds like we are for many, many good reasons, that we will have fewer trees. It's no longer going to be the quantity of trees that we have. It's going to be the quality of trees that we have. And if that's the fundamental principle, it seems like we must do whatever we can to protect a lime tree, in my opinion, because I would guess they are larger for all the reasons that have already been spoken about.
Thank you. Commissioner Gossett?
Just a quick question for Glenn and just the wording there. The word may, is that, should shall be in there instead of may, depending if we keep this language?
Yeah, I stumbled on that too. I think shall is better. Line trees shall not be counted in calculating tree density. Yeah.
But I think we're saying the consensus here might be that they shall be counted.
Right. In either event,
Either way.
it shouldn't be may, right.
Right. Yeah, I have Mayor, if I could just interrupt you for a minute, I have a sort of logistical question, and that is, it is now 11:17, and we did not get all the way through this one, but I'm wondering if we should agree that we'll get to a point today and stop, and if that would be the end of this section, which does have a few more paragraphs to go and a few more questions, or what?
I'd like to look at a time frame if possible, just because I have another meeting at noon.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
either quitting it sometime between 11:30 and 11:45 would be optimum for me, and
Okay.
if possible. So if you could keep that in mind, then target what you'd like us to focus on for the next meeting, and that might be helpful also.
Well, I was thinking that if we got, and there's no guarantee we're going to get all the way through this one, because as I said, there's some more sections to it. We could try to do that quickly. But then I guess I would say at the next meeting, we would pick up on maintenance of trees, 253-23, and then we could probably get through the rest of it in a meeting of about this same length. And I understand that won't happen for about a month. And in the meantime, I could be working on the first half of it, but I mean, I think it would be as simple as that, just sort of reaching a stopping point here and picking up again, same place next time.
I think that's a good program. So let's see what we can accomplish in the next 10 to 20, 25 minutes.
Okay. I have a question about the next one. Again, it comes from the code language that's already there. 242, it talks about, yeah, okay, this is the one that has the front setback requirement. But it's the second line that confuses me. This provision shall not apply to lots fronting on a street south, on an ocean block south of Pennsylvania. And then in number C at line 250, below that talks about lots located within a block of the ocean, having to select salt tolerant tree species. So I'm just wondering if, first of all, if those kinds of concepts can be combined and why Pennsylvania Avenue is in there. So, but it's what's in the current code. We just need to clean it up, I think.
I have a guess as to Pennsylvania, because that's kind of when that buffer of woods ends. Right, all of like Deauville Park and it's, all the dunes with the tree, like a lot of scrub oaks and pines. really block the strong winds and the salt air. So I think that might be why they chose wherever Pennsylvania came from. Because the first block of like Columbia and Henlopen, for example,
Right.
you don't need necessarily salt tolerant. I mean, no more than anywhere else in town.
Well, no, this is actually in the section about front. It exempts them from having to put a tree in the front setback
Mm-hmm.
for ocean blocks south of Pennsylvania Avenue. You think that's still relevant? Because of the
I would say it's probably more relevant for properties. I mean, I think of my parents' house, like,
yeah.
Goodness, if they had a front yard tree, it would have blown on their house 10 times over now. And same as any other house that fronts along the boardwalk, I don't see why in the world they would ever have to have front yard trees 50 feet from the sand.
Yeah, the only difference with anything north of Pennsylvania is you've got that buffer between the beach and the houses.
Yeah.
Commissioner Gossett, you have your hand up?
Yeah. You know, I guess I just wonder if we should be, if there needs to be a general statement here about ocean blocks, or whether there has to be still a differentiation of between different locations of ocean blocks. And I'm talking about the front. This is only about the front setback requirement here. The other one is a different issue.
Well, the item dealing with front setback are lines 242 to 244 only, correct?
Right.
Right, okay.
So if that sentence is only about front setback and not about other aspects of being close to the ocean, then the question it becomes, do you exempt ocean block properties from front setback requirements, or only in certain areas, as it is here?
There's no need to exempt somebody like on Columbia and Henlopen from a front
Okay.
yard street tree on the first block. So I think if we're going to exempt something, it would be within certain limits.
So then the south of Pennsylvania is still relevant.
If we really think the whole ocean block, see, like if you look at most of our prevailing winds are east or northeast, so those tend to get the south side, the first half of the south side blocks, more than anything, have trouble surviving.
Okay.
So I don't know how far you can narrow it down. I mean, I've not had a lot of complaints about people having to plant street trees in their front yard on the ocean blocks.
Should we take it out and let it be dealt with case by case basis? In terms of the front, this is only the front setback requirement. The rest of the other issue is down below. We'll get to that in a minute. Should we take it out, that there are not any lots that it doesn't apply to?
Is it appealable? Can somebody get appeal and not have to put a front yard tree in? Because right now you really can't appeal the minimum density. It's more of the fee in lieu of mitigation.
Right.
I mean, I guess you could appeal it, but because I can see certain scenarios in which it's not, like we do have houses that front the boardwalk that have shared driveways and that their address would be 404 South Boardwalk. It would not be appropriate for them to have a front yard tree. They'd just be replacing it every 3 years because it won't live.
Right.
I mean, we have the same problems on our street trees.
And this covers it. I mean, so this provision that's in there, that's been in there, the code all this time, does cover those situations.
Wait, been in there? What do you
Yeah,
mean?
this code, this is the same code. This is in the current code. This provision shall not apply to lots fronting on a street on an ocean block south of Pennsylvania. That's in the current code. And I'm saying, so that covers it, so we should just leave it alone?
Where is it in the current code? I don't have that memorized.
I thought it was in,
I'm typing in Pennsylvania, nothing's.
oh, wait a minute,
coming
wait a
up.
minute. Maybe, okay, maybe it came up in the planning commission revisions.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
the
I
only
guess
thing,
so, yeah, because that has the the current code has the salt tolerant.
which won't really be necessary in this code, that whole line, because the few species that are considered extraordinarily salt tolerant are gonna just be on the tree list anyways. So we can eliminate that, honestly.
Okay, so now I see that this came in the planning commission's revision, I guess as a way of exempting many lots that some of the examples you just gave from needing a front yard tree. And I guess that's what I'm saying. Do we need this exempt? Because otherwise it's say that you don't normally appeal minimum tree density requirements. So then do we need an exemption for these ocean blocks to not have to have a front tree set in the setback?
I don't know. It hasn't really been an issue, but I can see instances in which it would be.
So maybe we need to think about that one a little more in the interest of time here.
Yeah.
And also just thinking about that, you talk about lots fronting a street. I know theoretically we have determined that the boardwalk is a street,
Right.
but should we call out that? Because Liz, you mentioned houses that face the boardwalk.
Mm-hmm. There are a few of them. Yeah. That would, if we keep that exemption, I think it would be wise to add boardwalk in there, just so it's very clear that we intend the boardwalk.
Okay, that makes sense.
I mean, maybe it's only houses that front the boardwalk. I mean,
Okay,
but like I said, probably better discuss it another time.
okay, that's fine. And then of course, the next one is the one where it says a tree that is trimmed ornamentally that prevents its attaining its natural height shall not be counted to meet the density requirement. So we want that to stay in, right? That gets you to the crepe myrtle shrub versus crepe myrtle tree, right?
Yeah, it helps.
Okay.
There's been some times that a tree was 20 feet tall because they kept it 20 feet tall.
Okay. And then the next one about the salt tolerant, you're saying we don't need that anymore?
No, because right now I use it. There are a few species that are really salt tolerant for those ocean blocks, but the few of them that would be on our recommended tree list anyways.
Okay, so that's the whole clause is moved then, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, really most of the trees that are native to the area, like a lot of them, like a cedar, a juniper, they're super salt tolerant. So the native ones do pretty well with that, but.
Okay. Okay, and then.
Susan, let me, Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Okay.
Yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but in point number 6 there, under B about the trimmed trees, should we call out crepe myrtle? I mean, they're everywhere in town. And I do think everybody feels that those are trees. And so should we call out as an example that would not count and use this, call it out by name?
So say such as, but not limited to.
Yeah, a crepe myrtle, because I mean, even around me, every single yard has one and they all feel that they're trees. And, but if we're saying they aren't, I think we should say that as an example somewhere.
Well, some of them are, they're not, just not if they're trimmed way down. Some of them are trees.
Right, but then that's the confusion. Is somebody going to go measure, oh, it's 13 feet or it's 12, oh, it's 16 feet. I mean, that one to me seems problematic as we had the discussion earlier, because some people cut them and some people don't. But I think everybody feels straight and it counts. Thank you.
Yeah, yes.
Good for thought. Thank you, Tim. Susan?
And the next couple of my, these last two may actually be more questions for Glenn, that on the density requirements, shall be met whether or not the lot had trees before, or whether or not the lot already had trees. And then the other one, if that it notwithstanding the requirements, that there are conditions under which they don't have to meet the requirements based on the date that this goes into effect. You know, I'm not sure how to go on that.
Are these new sections?
No, I don't think so.
Well, Glenn, D on 254,
Mhm.
that's in the code now, and we just straight up do not do it. Never have. So when somebody buys, I don't know how many purchases happen in the city limits, but when somebody buys a lot, I don't get a list of those and then reach out and say, hey, you got to plant your trees now.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but it would be a major change in how we currently do things and would require a lot of outreach if we wanted to do this.
So the intent of this provision is that upon conveyance, you got to come into compliance. It's not upon, conveyance and then, asking for a building permit or something. So it's strictly a conveyance. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, the planning commission's version added that one. Yeah.
No, I think
Well,
that's
it's in there. It's in the current code. It's in the current code that shall be met, whether or not there are any trees. It doesn't. The conveyance is not part of it. The conveyance was added as the trigger.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the commissioner's pleasure, but honestly, I don't know of any other instance where a conveyance triggers a zoning or land use type requirement to be brought into current standards. It's typically applying for a building permit for renovations or for new additions or subdivision, or so conveyance rarely is the trigger to, and typically you see things as being considered, existing legal nonconformities until there's an instance where somebody wants to upgrade or do some new development proposal. So, I mean, that's new to me. I'm not saying it's not, I'm not saying it's, on its face, I can't say that it's something that you can't legally require, but it's not conventional. And like Liz says, she doesn't get.
We got that.
Done it.
I was going to say, like Liz says, she doesn't.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mayor.
No, I'm sorry. We have Commissioner Tim Bennett and then Commissioner Sernowski. Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead and finish, Glenn.
All I was going to say is that, as Liz says, we have to change something administratively so that she would get notice of a conveyance and then, implement some process to let people know that they need to come into compliance, because she doesn't, under our standard administrative processes, she doesn't get notice of a conveyance.
Commissioner Bennett?
So is this, if I read this correctly, and this is where I think probably one of the sticking points is with residents. So if somebody buys a bungalow and they kind of clear cut the lot and then build a big house, is that what this refers to here, that they then would not have to come into compliance because they bought a lot and they had to take down trees to build, versus someone who may have 20 trees that wants to take one down is not allowed to. But if I built a house, I could basically take the trees down and then I'm not going to be held into compliance. Is that how I would read that?
No, this is just talking about the sale of a lot, not anything to do with construction or removal of trees. So say somebody bought a lot and it had 0 trees on it. The way this reads is that I then would have to inform them that they would have to plant 3 trees subject to our minimum density requirements.
See, I thought that was already a rule that we enforce. Is that not true?
No, we don't. If somebody just purchases a property, no. I don't, like Glenn said, I don't get notice of those at all.
And so then
no idea how many lots transfer.
Right. I'm sorry. So then what would the case be that I mentioned, where then if you bought a home that was people call it a tear down, is that handled differently then? Do they then have to put the trees in?
Well, if you're doing a building permit and you have a tree permit, then yeah, the replacement currently mitigation and minimum density would apply. And it stays the same here, just minimum density and tree for tree replacement would apply.
Okay. So this is solely for just a lot. Okay.
Yep, just somebody buys a house and doesn't do anything. They don't want to change it, remove trees, like nothing. They just purchase it.
Okay.
The trigger is a tree permit or a building permit, not the sale of the property.
Okay.
That's how I look at it.
So this would come out altogether then? Because it's in the current code, but Liz says she doesn't, that we don't do it, so.
I think you would take out the conveyance or transfer part. It would just be the part on whether or not it had trees prior.
Okay, all right, yeah, okay.
But I think you can collapse it all into one section, right? Right, Liz? I mean, we just want to say, if you're going to do if there's some land disturbance or development to occur on the property, then you have to come into compliance. I think that's what E is kind of getting at.
That is what E is. And the two changes in E, because that's in there now, in the code now. The two big changes are that land disturbance activity was added as a trigger instead of a building permit for a structure of 500 square feet or larger, or a cost of construction of $20,000 or more, both of which proved to be problematic. And so Liz, I think you're the one who came up with the land disturbance activity as having impact on trees, and therefore should be the trigger, any land disturbance activity, because it could be a small deck, whatever. And then the other change in this one is that the minimum size goes to 2 inches, again, should be caliper, and 8 feet rather than 3 inches and 12 feet. But otherwise, the concept is the same, that you don't have to come into compliance on density unless these things occur. Right, Liz? Is that your understanding?
Yes, that it has to be triggered by something.
Do you think that? I'm sorry. Do you think? I was going to ask Liz, do you think that the definition of land disturbance is defined well enough that you'll be able to implement it? It's better than what was in the code, I guess. $20,000.
Well, what's in the code is somewhat problematic in that it says like 500 square foot of improvements, and who's to define what an improvement is? Right. Really, 500 square feet of improvements could be renovating a kitchen.
Right.
It would have been better if it said 500 square feet of addition, so to speak. Land, I still think it needs to be quantified somehow. I mean, if somebody's putting in like a trash pad or a front walkway, I don't know if just saying, oh, you put a shovel in the ground, so.
Well, and this was the question I think Commissioner Legree raised at the beginning of the meeting about if you take a shovel to plant a tree, are you disturbing, disturbing land?
But this is a building permit, which involves land disturbance. And
okay,
the one thing that pulls that together is to issue any building permit, you can be like, and this gets complicated, but like things that were done without a permit, say you added walkways and it's nowhere in the file, that has to come back into compliance, right? But some pre-existing non-conforming things, if permitted correctly, are allowed to stay. So this is basically saying a pre-existing non-conformity, if you file a building permit that does any land disturbance, then you have to come into compliance with the tree code. And I don't know if that's really consistent with the way the zoning code is.
Oh, I thought it was.
Well, say you have, from when the zoning code changed in terms of setbacks, you don't have to then tear down the portion of your house that was built with
that's true.
A valid permit in the setback. You can't add to it, right? Or something that was done without a permit, you can't keep. coverage, you still have to meet the new coverage rules. I don't know on this one.
I've got Commissioner Sernowski.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I originally put my hand up because I just wanted to suggest we remove the conveyance part from the code. But on this topic, I think there needs to be a land disturbance tied to a square footage amount. If someone adds an outdoor shower, which is a few feet, or they add a pad for the HVAC systems to sit on, none of that should count. But if it's something greater than that, it certainly should. And it should be a land disturbance square footage, not an improvement square footage, because like you said, if someone puts in new cabinets in their kitchen for over 20 grand, that shouldn't count. So I think we just need to come up with a square footage and tie it to land disturbance as a defined term.
Yeah, and right now it's 500 for, that's 10% of the lot, right?
Commissioner Gossett?
I would just agree that it tied to a square footage, if it's 10% of the lot, because we have a couple lots that are over 5,000 square feet and some undersized, so maybe as a specific square footage amount, a percentage amount would be all. And what would it also involve if you said permit which involves mechanical land disturbance? So that if you hand shovel or hand digging, that's allowable. But if you bring a backhoe in or some type of mechanical land disturbance machinery or something, I don't know, but perhaps the square footage is a better way to manage it.
I think I would stay with the square footage, regardless of how you dig that hole. If you exceed the amount of square footage, I think that's when it would trigger in. Anybody else?
Well, I will say there was a lot of discussion about that within the tree group and with Liz and some examples. And the problem was that it's not the size of the construction or the building that's being done or the land disturbance, it's the location of the tree. So it's, if somebody can build is building a 200 square foot deck, but it's next to a protected tree, then that's an issue. And the same might even apply to the shower, depending on the location of the tree. So that's why the sort of general land disturbance came in. So, but I understand the need to clarify it some. I just,
Well, Commissioner, you're kind of talking about two different things, though. You're talking about protection of existing trees.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And I have the latitude in the existing code to require tree protection.
Right.
If something is gonna negatively affect trees.
So this is just coming into minimum density requirement.
Yes, this is.
Okay, well, in that case, I agree. Okay, you're right. Okay.
So whether it's 500 or 5% or 10%.
Maybe, yeah.
Something,
okay.
Yeah, something we can measure. There.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. I get, okay, I see now. Okay. And then the last thing is just that the no tree removal permit will be issued or approved if it will result in a density less than specified. That's in the current code and it remains. And that's the end of the section, unless anybody has any further thoughts.
I think that last section F is where we would put whether or not the minimum density sub requirements trigger everything, right?
Okay, let me make a note of that. Okay.
So no permit will be issued, no plan will be approved if it will result in a tree density less than subsection not, or in a tree density not meeting subsections A and I guess B, right? Because we're pulling the front yard tree into B.
Okay.
Something like that. I think that'll make it clear.
Okay. Thanks. So then the idea is we would pick up next time where we left off here. And
I think so. Good job, Susan. Thank you very much. Our next meeting, tree meeting number 4, the date is to be determined. We'll let you know as soon as we can. Reason why it's a delay a little bit is we're trying to address outdoor dining areas on public space and give that a little priority to it.
Yeah, I can understand. that.
With that, again, apologize to Miss St. Clair for, I don't have a magic button that deletes you. Just something happened probably on your end. And so Commissioner Gay will contact you and get your feedback on what we've talked about so far. Is that all right, Susan?
That's fine, yeah.
And with that, if there's no further comment, we'll adjourn this meeting at 11.